Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Right back at you. How are you today, Rory?
I'm very good, but I'm a bit windswept. It's very windy here in the UK, and every time I go out of the door, I get a free blow dry off my hair.
It's that
very windy.
That time of year, isn't it, where the storms hit the United Kingdom as we're making this live. You've tuned in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Thanks for joining us. This is episode 144. We've got three amazing topics today around counselling and psychotherapy, the study thereof and the practice thereof. And we're going to be starting with our first topic, which is making an ethical referral. Then we'll move into our section called Check-in with CPCAB, where, Rory, you met with Kelly Budd and you spoke about something that I think is so important. And I know we talked together and we've experienced this firsthand, and it's what a tutor can learn from their students.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Someone once said to me that you can only really learn your craft if you actually teach it to others. And I tend to agree with that. And Kelly outlines what learning tutors gain from their students. And sometimes I think that students think it's just a one-way street, that, tutor tells and informs the learners, and that hopefully is true. But also there is another side to it. Tutors do actually learn from their students, and Kelly tells us what she has learned.
Looking forward to that one. And then we'll be ending episode 144 by delving into practice matters, where we look at being in practice and what we might come across in that. And Rory, you touched base with Emma Chapman on a really important topic that we've spoke about many times before, but we're now speaking with an expert that you interviewed, and that is on suicide prevention.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very sensitive topic, but therapists do come across clients who may wish or think about taking their own lives, and Emma outlines ways of working with clients like that, and just talks about some of the fallacies and fantasies that the general public sometimes have about suicide.
So that's what's in store for you with episode 144. We're going to start off with that topic, making an ethical referral. And I'm just mindful when we speak about referrals that this is something that is so important. If you're in counselling, when you go into practice, there's going to come a time when you're going to need to make a referral. And it's worth doing the CPD. It's worth looking at this way before that happens. Whether you're a student, you need to write about it, how to make a referral, what referrals look like, or if you're a practicing practitioner. What's your thoughts on this, Rory?
Well, I think that, as you rightly say, Ken, sometime in the arc of your therapy, you're going to have to make an ethical referral. And making an ethical referral takes a lot of thought. It's not just a case of sitting in front of a client and saying, look, I don't think that I can work with your issues. It's a case of thinking it through. And, the example I would give is a client who may come with one issue, and as the therapy starts to expand and through the arc of therapy, it becomes clear to the therapist that actually someone might have a very, very real difficulty with substance misuse, which is causing their problems. And, the BACP say that we provide an adequate, appropriate standard of service to our clients and work within our competence. And therapists I think counsellors really do need to consider working within their competence. And as we know, working with people in addictions takes a specialised, structured process, and sometimes referrals needed. So quite a lot about that. It has actually come up in our Facebook page, and it was a question asked in the Facebook page, and also it comes through occasionally in the post bag. And if you're not a member of our Facebook page, then go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us. We're a closed group. Knock on the door. We'll let you in. We're a friendly bunch. Thousands of like-minded people. We've got lots of students in there. We've got qualified practitioners, supervisors, a smattering of tutors who come in and offer wisdom. And why don't you come in and join the party, because a lot of people love our page and get so much from it. And in going back to referrals, I think also a referral can have quite an impact on a therapist, If a therapist is working with somebody and realises there has to be a referral, you've got to be thoughtful about, is this going to be a phased ending? Are you going to have a phased ending with it? Where you might work with a client in between the referral coming in and you leaving the client and moving on? Is it going to be an abrupt ending? And also, how's the client going to react? Being told that maybe the service you offer isn't the service for the client may bring up a lot of feelings for the client. So, working with how the client may react to being told that the service you're offering isn't matching their needs, have to be very careful. You don't want to give the impression to the client that the client believes that even the counsellor can't deal with my issues. My issues are so big, even the counsellor can't deal with them. So a lot of thought needs to go into that. And of course, it needs to be planned out in supervision.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we're speaking about referrals, we need to look at the different moving parts of a referral. So the first step of a referral is identifying that there's a need to refer. So before we make that referral and go into the mechanics of what that may look like, and we may come up with a question, well, what would constitute a referral? And Rory, you've already covered a number of them there. When you find that you may be working outside of your competence, and you used the example of substance misuse there, Rory, but it's any time where you feel that you're not able to best service that client. They came into you because they had a need, and if you're not able to make that need, then potentially a referral is on the cards for that client. And then another example might be if you're working within an organization where you're only able to offer a set amount of sessions. So say, for instance, you're within your agency, you can only offer 6 sessions, and a client comes in with a presentation that clearly demands a lot more than 6 sessions. We would be selling that client short by trying to work with their presentation within 6 sessions. A referral must be considered in that kind of a situation. And then another instance is when you find that your therapy is not a match for the client that is coming in. And an example for that may be a client comes in and they have a fear of flying. They've got a phobia of getting on aeroplanes, and they're going on a trip in 2 weeks' time, and they want to do some quick therapy to be able to get on that plane and feel okay with themselves. Well, that would not be appropriate for a person-centered counsellor. It would be more a cognitive based, maybe CBT, and a referral may be needed in that situation. But we're talking about the client's presentations here and a need to refer, but we also need to look at ourselves as counsellors. Sometimes we have to refer a client because of ourselves. We've got to look to ourselves. We need to look to ourselves first to be able to service our clients. So if a client came in with a presentation that maybe clashed with something that we were going through at that time. And I'm just going to use an example here of divorce. So if you, as the counsellor, are going through a terrible divorce at that time, and a client comes in presenting that they want to bring their divorce, you need to work really carefully to make sure you can service that client and you're not going to get your own stuff mixed in there. And then, of course, there is the instance when if you, as the counsellor, feel unsafe, you feel you're in private practice, maybe you're doing lone working, you maybe don't have a team around you, and you feel unsafe, it may be time to look at referring the client onto some other service that is better able to meet their needs. Because if you're not feeling safe, you're not going to be fully integrated within that relationship. So there's kind of some of the reasons that one might refer, and of course there are many more than that. But Rory, how might we kind of approach that when we've recognized that there is a need to refer?
Well, I think we need to approach it first of all in the foremost sensitively. We need to be really, really sensitive, and we need to have a solution before we say we need a referral. So you can't say to a client, "I'm going to refer you," and the client says, "To whom?" and you say, "I don't know. I'm going to have to find out." You really need to get, as I like to say, your ducks in a row. You need to get yourself, a competent therapist should have a real good understanding of partner agencies and how they work, where they can refer. And I have a little book of information of partnership agencies, be that community mental health team, be that drugs and alcohol service, be that other therapists I can refer on to who deal in specialisms. But you need that information, and that comes with experience and working with colleagues. You can ask, if you're in an agency, you can ask colleagues, who would refer to if someone had a serious issue with and they would say, oh, we would refer them to that. And you also need to know how long the referral process takes. You need to have all that information, front and center before you broach, because clients will ask that question, well, how long will it take? And, where would you refer me to? And also it has to be seamless. In an ideal world, and we don't live in an ideal world, the idea of a referral is that there should be no overdue delay, that clients would just be referred on and they'd move into the next service that could better support them. But yes, I think as a way of broaching the subject, I think very sensitively explore what's come up for the client. So I use the analogy of someone who's got real difficulties with alcohol, and maybe just kind of have an honest conversation and say, look, I've heard what you've said about, you feeling depressed and you're feeling anxious. And I just wonder, you've also told me that you drink, 4 bottles of wine a day. I'm wondering if that could be connected, and see if you can get a shared understanding of where the issue may be coming from. And then once that the client understands that, then broach the subject of referring for support with that. It's never easy. And one thing I would say is that when you're working with a referral, you need to be aware of something called the Caldecott principles. In the late 1990s, hospitals used to dump confidential information on landfill sites, and people's private information was blowing around in the wind. So what happened was there was an inquiry. It was chaired by Dame Fiona Caldecott. It was in 1997, and she talked about the Caldecott principles of information sharing. And I think every therapist needs to have a real good handle on the Caldecott principles, because you only share information that is relevant to the person who's going to be working with the referral, and everybody knows really their place in that. So it's essential that anybody doing a referral has a really good handle on the Caldecott principles.
100%. And look to confidentiality. You quite rightly said, Rory, about your little book, and that does come with the years of being in practice and making those connections. But it's well worth taking some time to look around, see who your local services are in case you do need to refer. But it goes beyond just having a check on their website and understanding what their telephone number is. Give them a ring and have a chat with them, because organizations will have referral processes, referral procedures. When you speak to them, they should be happy to chat with you as a fellow professional. Ask them about their waiting lists. Ask them about what the referral pathway is. Do you need to fill in a form? Is there documentation that needs to be sent through? Do you need to get the client to contact them personally? Are you able to give the client's details over and they can't contact the client? So all that needs to be taken into consideration when it comes to referrals. As you said, Rory, as we went into this, a really important part of being a counsellor. And I think when we look to studies, maybe not enough time is spent on referral processes and all the different moving parts of that. And I would also encourage you to go and look at your contract. So often when we discuss a topic, Rory and I here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, we come back to the contract, which is the very first time you meet that client and you're telling them what is on offer. You can add what would happen if you needed to make a referral into your contract, so that if it does come in, maybe in session 6 or 7, that you recognize you have to make a referral, that it's not a shock and it's not the very first time that this client may be hearing this. You spoke about an ideal world, Rory, and I guess in an ideal world, in that very first presentation, we might pick up that a referral is needed, and then we're able to explain this to the client before the relationship and the trust is built and before they've brought a whole pile of their material. But that is, we don't work in an ideal world, we work in a real world, and sometimes it can be deep into the sessions that you recognize the need for referral, where a lot of material has been shared with you, a relationship has been built, and the client may not want a referral. They may say, I don't want to, I like you, I've built my relationship up with you. So if you're popping that in your initial contract, that can kind of soften that, and it's just a line saying on referrals from time to time when material is presented that I don't feel is within my competence, I may need to make a referral, but we'll speak about that if and when that does come up, just so they have a heads up on it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, clients' autonomy is at the forefront of our minds as practitioners, and it would be up to the client to decide. This isn't a case of a dictation by the therapist. Sometimes just an offer by saying, maybe it might be useful to think about this service and explain what the service can offer. And sometimes actually explaining what a service can offer is better than just mentioning the service. Coming from you and saying, look, it can do this and it can do that, and this program's a bit more structured and it can support you in this way, is far better than just giving someone a phone number and saying off you go, and that's where you need to go. Sometimes really just explaining it, being very thoughtful, and working with the anxieties. A client may have great anxiety about being referred to a different service that works in a different way. Acknowledge those anxieties and work with them and listen for any kind of misinformation the client might have. I've done lots of referrals where people said, well, you're going to do this to me and you're going to do that to me. And I've said, no, that's not how it works. This is how it works. I know how the system works. So when you're thinking of your partner agencies, really find out what the programs are, really have a good working insight into them. And you're able to give that to your client, share that with your client to reduce their anxiety and make them feel that you're actually caring and you're actually present with them.
So much to consider when it comes to referrals. And kind of one final note from my side. I worked in a multidisciplinary team for many years where referral was kind of the order of the day. There were referrals in and there were referrals out. And one of the things that became apparent to me is that there are certain people that kind of get caught up in the system. They may have complex need and they get referred from person to person to person who's trying to kind of offload them. And I think, as you said, Rory, it's about realizing you have a human being in front of you, taking into consideration their fears, their anxieties, their feelings, and work through this in supervision. As Rory said, don't let it be a knee-jerk reaction. Make it be a really considered decision when you need to refer on. Do you really need to refer on? And I speak from experience of going to my own supervisor early in my practice days, saying, you know what, I think I need to refer this client for XYZ reasons, and working through that in supervision, it came to light that I didn't need to refer this client. I just needed to work with them and hold them in a different way. So really take it in. Only refer when you need to. Know your referral pathways. Make sure it's covered in your initial contract. So much information there. Wow.
Yes, referrals. It's a big thing, and I think quite can be quite a scary and kind of unsettling procedure for new therapists if they've never done it before. So, as always, pre-warn, pre-planning. Always kind of negates some of that anxiety.
Changing gears from referrals and moving into our next topic, our next section, which is check-in with our very good friends at CPCAB, where Rory, you spoke to Kelly Budd about what tutors learn from their students. I recognise this from first-hand from Counselling Tutor, to be honest. Both Rory and myself are tutors. We taught together for some years, and one thing that we did was we listened and we learned from our students, and it is thanks to our students that Counselling Tutor exists, because of their needs, because of what they shared, and the knowledge they gave us, that we were able to build Counselling Tutor. So it is such an important topic. What can we expect from Kelly?
Well, I think a lot of introspection and reflection. Kelly speaks eloquently about how working as a tutor not only informed how she taught, but also informed her counselling practice. So let's have a listen to Kelly.
Check in with CPCAB.
And it's our great pleasure to welcome the fab Kelly Budd from CPCAB. And Kelly's going to be sharing with us the idea of what your tutors learn from you, that tutors actually learn from the students. This is a bit of a novel piece of thinking, Kelly.
I really like this idea. I think it's probably a phrase that I use an awful lot around CPCAB. I talk to people about the things that I learned from teaching and the things that I learned from my students. So, and sometimes people do look at me slightly surprised. Oh, really? This is kind of such a common thing. And I think there's this really kind of almost archaic idea that students are the people that learn from the tutors, and that's it. That I remember doing my teacher training, and my teacher training teacher, used to use the analogy that a student was an empty cup that you were there to fill up with knowledge and information. And it just always felt like such a dull analogy. I thought, well, it doesn't sum it up for me. It doesn't match my experience.
No, and I think you make a very good point. I was just talking to someone earlier about my experiences of doing my teacher training, and it doesn't always match the uniqueness of training counsellors and being a counselling tutor. Sometimes, I think a lot of it is vastly different to traditional teaching methods.
Yeah, I think we often come to our teacher training as counselling practitioners knowing that we have a different relationship with our clients. We don't see our clients as an empty cup that we fill up with self-awareness. So why would we see our students as that? So I always came to my teaching with this kind of sense of, I'm not delivering something to you that you receive and then go home. We're on a journey together. We're kind of enthusiastic travel companions saying, okay, so this is great. Where should we go next? And that to me kind of means that you're both on that journey. You're both kind of partners in it. And the learning is on both sides.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, a lot of therapists, I would like to think all, learn from their clients. I've learned huge amounts from my clients through the years. And it's the same with my students. I can think of, unfortunately, confidentiality precludes me from sharing what I've learned. But, I've learned huge amounts, certainly about individual life experiences as it relates to counselling theory. And you shared a few ideas with me about what you learned. Do you want to share those?
Yeah. I think when I was kind of reflecting on this topic to myself, I thought, well, if I was to pin it down, what really did I learn? And I thought, well, for myself, I definitely learned how to be a better counsellor. I could feel my practice as a counsellor improving by teaching other people. I would see them practice. I would see them respond in their skills practices to a client in a kind of really nuanced way. I'd see them kind of achieve levels of relating that I would be able to sit back and observe it and really think, I love how you did that. That's something I want to be able to incorporate in my practice in the future. So it definitely made me better in relationship with my clients by seeing other people in theirs, even though they were, in theory, kind of less skilled or knowledgeable than I was at that point. They still brought things to it that I wasn't at that point. I think that was really important. It also made me much more knowledgeable about my theory, about kind of the theoretical, the legislation sides, the ethical sides. You cannot teach somebody something that you don't understand yourself. And being able to kind of try and break down, okay, so this is what this word in the ethical framework truly means. And then have a student ask me 20 questions about it. You got to really know your stuff to answer all of those questions. So it made me go away. It made me learn more. I grew far more kind of embedded in my understanding of my theoretical approach by telling people why I believed that that was the way to practice. You really do kind of learn what you believe by hearing yourself talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Rogers himself, Carl Rogers, wrote a couple of books on learning. To become a teacher was one of them. He was a very disruptive, and I use the term respectfully, influence in the world of American education, because of course he was taught by John Dewey and William Kirkpatrick, who are both very disruptive people themselves. And Rogers talked about person-centered learning, and that's something I think that should be evident in the classroom. This way of being should be projected and shown at every level of our practice.
Yeah, I really rediscovered Rogers again when I became a teacher. I learned all of his kind of person-centered theory as a student when I was being taught counselling, and then coming back to it and really kind of going through Freedom to Learn is one of my favourite books, looking at how kind of Rogers explained the kind of facilitative environment that really allows people to grow, to gain knowledge, to understand, to also self-direct in that situation. Learners who are able to set their own learning goals, to plan their own future learning. And essentially the teacher is just there to support that, to guide, to allow them to progress the way that they need to. I think it's far, far removed from kind of really didactic teaching approaches where it's perceived that the learner knows nothing and the tutor is there just to pass on their gems of wisdom.
Yes, absolutely, and I think didactic. This idea of it's sometimes called in the teaching profession chalk and talk. Where I was taught like that, the teacher would write it, then you copy it down in the hope that by writing it down and copying it, you might learn it. Never seemed to work for me, I have to say.
Yeah.
But yes, and the idea that we engage in what's called vicarious learning, where we learn from others and how others are. And I guess that's what you're saying. We can learn so much from our students. I've had some fab. They're all fab. All my students. If any of my students are listening, they're all fab students. But I've learned a lot from all those fab students. I can't just kind of say there's one or two. They're all fab. But yeah, I learned so much. What's your view on the challenge of learning from your students? Is there a challenging aspect, do you think?
It is very, very challenging to be a teacher. I think I underestimated it at first. I thought being a counsellor and kind of holding that space would be the most challenging thing I did. Teaching is far more challenging. Working with the group dynamics, working with people that are resistant to certain aspects of their development. I think I really had so much to learn from my students, but if they're listening to this now, there will be some of them and they know who they are that were the challenging ones, the ones that created conflict in the group, the ones that were challenged to motivate. And I had to learn afresh how to manage all those things, how to work effectively with conflict in a teaching room that wasn't in a counselling room. I had so much supervision about my students over the years, more so than I did with clients in the kind of last few years of my kind of teaching career. And I really picked apart in supervision. What is it about this student that's triggering this reaction in me? Why can't I make these two people get along? Why are they constantly nitpicking at each other in the room? And that was such growth for me. I learned so much from that experience that, yeah, I crave going back to teaching, mainly for that side of it, more so than, oh, what can I deliver today? It's, get me in the room with those students again. Let's work through some of this stuff.
Let's go, Kelly. Get yourself a room. I'll pop down and we'll knock out a few lessons together.
You're on.
And I have to say that's the feeling that's in me. The sight of students growing, and one of my students christened the course RC lessons because people got more challenging and more self-aware and wouldn't put up with things. And I always knew if they were progressing because they used to challenge me more and more as the course came to the end, and I used to think, job done.
Yeah. Yeah, when they just sit there and nod and they take it, that's a sign you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
When they start asking you questions, challenging what you're saying, I don't agree with that, let's debate it. That's when you know you've really got a group that's engaged in it. And that's what I used to love. Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, you know for sure that they're going to be out there, working in the world and maybe using that kind of self-confidence, in the service of the client, because that's all we do. Everything we do, we be as counsellors or teachers, everything, I guess, has an audience of one, which is the client.
Yeah, and it's that level of critical engagement in what they're doing, whether it's in a classroom or in their work with a practitioner, with a client. They're going to be self-critical, improving, constantly wanting better for themselves and for others. That's the sort of student I used to love seeing come out the end of my courses.
Yeah, I think you can learn so more. I miss the most about teaching, Kelly. Free tea bags.
You got free ones? We had to pay for our own.
No, at the end of the year, students used to turn up with industrial packs of tea bags. I never bought a tea bag for about 5 years, and yeah, but it was very kind. I mean, I think it's an appropriate gift because I do drink a lot of tea, but yeah, I do miss it, and just to see people, as Rogers would say, the person of tomorrow. Rogers made a big thing about who will the person of tomorrow be, and we're in that process of seeing those people of tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's it. The book we were talking about last week, the dedication on the front page of it says, "My thanks to the students who taught me as much as I taught them." That really comes from the heart. I really did learn so much from my students over the years, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Yes.
And they are the people now that I know are out there working with clients, and I'm very, very pleased about that.
And I'm sure they're listening to the podcast and saying, "That's my teacher. That's my teacher."
Hopefully, you know who you are.
You all know who you are. And as always, Kelly Budd, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rory. Cheers.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Yeah, well, there you have it. I'm listening to Kelly speak. I can see so much of that in my own practice, and really, in retrospect, very grateful for the time of teaching and what my students taught me. I think if I was a student, I'd be thinking, I never realised that tutors learn from the students, but they do. So might be food for thought next time you sat in class.
100%. There's a parallel there to the counselling room as well. It's the same in counselling. When a client comes in, I know that when we're in the counselling relationship, I learn so much from the clients that come in. It's not me counselling at them. It is a relationship, and it's the same during your studies. It really does parallel. So I guess moving away from studies and into practice matters, where we kind of discuss what we may find our qualified practitioners presenting and how we may work with that within our practice. And today, you actually spoke with an expert, Rory. It's Emma Chapman on suicide prevention, and I know that Emma has very kindly done a full CPD lecture on this topic, which is available from our new CPD provision for qualified practitioners, and you can find that at counselorcpd.com. That is the website, or go to counsellingtutor.com. There's a link there that would take you through there as well. And I guess the idea of counselorcpd.com is to provide on-demand lectures that you can stream at a time when you need them and get the relevant information when you need it, and without having to go to a conference, you can consume that material within your own home. But what did Emma kind of share, and what can we expect?
Well, it was good to catch up with Emma, a fellow tutor, and she shared that to be a therapist, you really need to have some sort of strategy when working with a client who may wish to take their own life. And she outlines certain strategies and talks a little bit about how she works when a client presents in this way. It's interesting listening, Ken.
Well, without any further ado, let's dive straight into Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Emma Chapman, who's a counsellor based in Northwich in Cheshire in the United Kingdom. And one of the specialities that you give CPD sessions on, and I've researched, is the kind of sad but prevalent in our society, suicide. And I wonder, do you have any kind of statistics on the kind of suicide rates that are in the UK?
Hi, Rory. Yeah, I do, and they're all quite shocking, actually. I know that we had some figures from 2018. They've just kind of come through in the past few months, and they say that the number of suicides was 6,507, and that was in 2018. And what we're finding, although the overall rate's going down, we're finding that suicides in young people remains high, and actually it's the biggest killer of young people. We're finding that young women in particular are dying by suicide more often, and we're also finding that mothers in the first year after birth are dying more often, and I think we all know that it's a big killer of men as well. So although overall the figures do seem to be dropping, which is fantastic, we are seeing rises in particular areas of suicide.
So as a practitioner, what are the signs, what are the kind of things that we need to consider when a client's speaking with us, which could give the indication that they may be thinking of taking their own life? And I'm very keenly aware that we don't use the term commit suicide anymore, Because it's not an offence,
no.
is it? No.
It's not an offence, and unfortunately we are kind of left with that language, because it used to be an offence, and that language does, I think it promotes the stigma around suicide. So yeah, we don't say commit, we say die by suicide. You're absolutely right. And in terms of signs, it's really hard, isn't it? And I always say, yes, you can look out for signs, but ultimately, if somebody's coming to see you as a counsellor, that chances are they're quite distressed for quite a few different reasons, you know. Talking to laymen out there, I will say look out for 3 different signs, and that's unusual things that they might be saying. So I use examples like, oh, I've just had such a big weight off my mind, and just something unusual like that. And it's really hard to say exactly what that would be. Unusual behaviour, you know, we're looking out for them doing strange things, and one that quite often shocks people is giving away valuable things. If people start doing that, you might want to start questioning what that's about. And there's so many different sorts of behaviour, and the people that you work with, what's unusual, and stressful life events, transitions, losses, all of those things. And if you've got all those 3 things together, they really are quite worrying. And you've got somebody that's at risk. But ultimately, you are never, ever going to know if somebody's having thoughts of suicide unless you ask them. And unfortunately, I think often we're really frightened of asking even counsellors, even myself. I'm experienced in doing this now. I lead sessions on how to ask the question, are you having thoughts of suicide? And even I still struggle. It feels like such a difficult thing to talk about. As a society, we're not very good at it, are we?
No, and I think you're absolutely right, Emma. This, it can feel intrusive, and even asking questions such as, are you thinking of ending your life? And if the answer to that is an affirmative answer, asking if there's a plan or if there's ever done it before, so you can assess the elements of risk. It can be quite difficult for practitioners. But do you think it's an essential kind of conversation to have with a client?
Absolutely. I absolutely think it's essential. We don't really know why people are coming to see us. We don't know what fears they have. The amount of people, when I've asked the question, that are relieved to have been asked for the first time, to be able to talk about it openly, not to feel scared of what's happening to them. It's amazing, really. I think we've got fears about what might happen if we ask the word about suicide, and we use the word suicide in a session. But actually, our clients are the ones that have got the biggest fears about this. And by talking openly about it, what we can do is we can show them that actually they're in control more than they think they are, and that they, like you say, doing things like a safety plan can actually be a really, really empowering thing to do with a client. It can help them to understand that they can keep themselves safe. So it is absolutely essential. I think as counsellors, we're working more and more, particularly private counsellors, with individuals that have been turned away from services because they are suicidal. I know that my experience is, sadly, if people are suicidal, sometimes they're told until they've not attempted suicide, if they've attempted a number of times, they can't go back and access the services because people are frightened of what might happen. So we're seeing it more and more often. So it's really important that we ask. We don't know unless we ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important thing. Part of being a therapist is creating a therapeutic dialogue and creating what's sometimes referred to as relational depth. And as part of that is exploring the client's life experience and their view of the world as they see it, the phenomenological experience. And suicide could be a great part in that. You talk about making a safety plan. I wonder if you could just outline the kind of things that you'd have in a safety plan.
Well, a safety plan's really about making sure that the person who is having thoughts of suicide is able to stay safe in the moment. It's not about taking away thoughts of suicide, because nothing's that magic. Sadly, if it was that easy, we'd all be having safety plans all over the place. But it is about helping that person to understand why it is that they're still alive, what it is that's kept them alive. And I always kind of in my head think of it as that kind of being the hanger, and then we hang the rest of the plan off that. Okay, these are the reasons you want to stay alive. So how can we keep you alive for that? And we start to think about what their triggers might be, what kind of things might impact the thoughts of suicide, and if they have a plan, as you mentioned, do they have a plan? If they do have a plan, how can we keep them safe from that plan? Do we need to make the environment safe? Do they need to make sure they avoid certain things like, I don't know, alcohol or drugs or certain people when they're feeling vulnerable? It's really about helping them to understand what their triggers are when it comes to thoughts of suicide, and how they can stay safe for the reasons they give you. And those reasons, I think this is the important thing, the reasons they give you are often not the reasons that you might think their reasons for staying alive.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the overarching things is, of course, if someone isn't here, therapy cannot continue. If someone has taken their own life, therapy cannot continue. I wonder, as we come to the end of this kind of interview, if we could look at some of the kind of urban myths that surround suicide. So I've got a small list here. The first is people who talk about suicide don't do it. Is that an urban myth?
Oh, absolutely. It's so frustrating, isn't it? I think I've spoken to people who it's taken so much courage for them to come and ask for some help, and I see it in the NHS. I hear it from people that have tried to access support, and they've been told, well, you've come here, so you're obviously okay, you're obviously able to keep yourself safe. Absolutely ridiculous. It makes me feel really sad for the people that have been able to reach out for help. They're reaching out for help because they need help and they need support. Yeah,
and I think that's a myth absolutely busted. And also that more people commit suicide at Christmas.
I don't really know about that one. I'm not going to lie to you, Rory. I should imagine Christmas is a tricky time, but I don't know if more people die at Christmas. Do you know the answer to that one?
Strangely enough, I do. And the answer to that is it's actually in the spring. And there is a thought that the reason for that is the brighter weather energizes people to take action.
Right. Okay.
And I recently read some up to date research on that. The final one that I want to breach is the contribution of substances like alcohol or drugs in relation to suicide. Is there a correlation between people who may take alcohol and suicide?
Is there a correlation? It's hard, isn't it? Because I think that what we would find is there's a correlation between people who are in distress and might use alcohol and drugs in order to cope with that distress.
Yes.
And I think what I find when I work with people is we talk about things like alcohol and drugs and whether they help or don't help when they're having thoughts of suicide. And on some occasions, actually, it does help them to cope in those moments. However, what I will always do is talk to them about the fact that suicide is often a really impulsive act. And when we are using alcohol or drugs, we do have a tendency often to be more impulsive. So if people are saying to me that, they have a tendency to be really, really impulsive, but they think alcohol helps, then when they're having thoughts of suicide, I'd be challenging that and saying, actually, you're telling me you might be impulsive, and that's not great to be taking alcohol with that.
Well, Emma, thank you so much for sharing that information. I know that it's a great fear for a lot of therapists, especially newbie therapists who are just coming into practice, or maybe therapists who are engaging with clients who may have, may wish to end their lives. And I think, what you've shared today is going to be just so helpful. So, Emma Chapman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Emma Chapman for all that information that is so, so important that we need to know. And thank you, Rory, as well, for taking your time to meet up with Emma. And just to repeat that Emma did do a complete lecture on this topic, which you can get from counselorcpd.com. That is our provision for qualified counsellors, where we have online lectures that you can stream to your phone, to your tablet, to your computer, enjoy in the comfort of your own home. Choose the topics you want to learn about and stream them in. I guess it's almost like the Netflix of CPD, Rory.
It is, and that kind of wraps up this episode. We started off by making an ethical referral, and don't forget, I've got a super duper handout on that. So if you go to episode 144 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, it's on our site, on our website, counsellingtutor.com. You can download that, and that's a free handout for you. And then we talked about with Kelly Budd about what tutors learn from students. And finally, we caught up with Emma Chapman, sharing really, really important information on how to work with clients who may be thinking of taking their own lives. And on that, as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.